Hello, everybody. I'm Pastor Siri. I'm a Lutheran pastor and a spiritual seeker. And today I'm talking about how cool it is that Ramadan and Lent, a Muslim and Christian holy seasons, have overlapped almost completely this year, and they'll continue to overlap. They did a little bit last year. They're going to continue to overlap for the next couple of years. And I've always found that there were some beautiful similarities between these two seasons. And so I'm going to talk about a little bit about what makes them similar, what makes them different, and we can talk a little bit about holy seasons and spiritual practices. So take a listen. Now, the first thing I want to say is that I do not tolerate any Islamophobia or really any prejudice against any particular kind of religion. We can always be open, we can be curious, we can ask questions, but every religion I've ever studied has a very beautiful core. And yet the beginning of every religion, the core of every faith, the inspiration of every faith is different from the institutions, especially those in power that can at times corrupt that particular, co-opt that particular religion. And the followers as well can be very varied, from very enlightened people who really take to heart the transformative power of that faith, all the way to people who think very black and white and often use that religion as a place to hide their ego and their own power and control wants. So you can look at absolutely any religion on this planet and you can find practitioners who kind of ruin that particular faith. And you can also find people who reveal and show the very, very best parts of it. So I just want to say that right up front, because some of the people watching this come from many different parts of the world, and you may have very different experiences. And as I said before, every time I study a different faith or religion, I find something really beautiful there that I absolutely love. And I honor that as being the core of that faith. It also was brought to me a while ago, and I thought this was a really beautiful point, that we often want people to look at the best of our religion while we turn around and we look at the worst of someone else's religion. So I'm a Christian, and Christianity has done some horrible things in the past, and there are Christians today who stand for pretty much the opposite of everything that I believe in. And I would not want for people to judge all of Christianity or Jesus by those people following. And in the same way, I shouldn't turn and look at a faith and look at people doing some of the worst things and say, oh, that's what that faith is about. And that's one reason why we separate Judaism from the nation of Israel. We separate Islam from people who might be doing terrorist actions. I like to separate Christianity from some of the mega churches and the people who are using power and control. So I just want to say that right away. Of course, if you have any well-meaning questions, you can always ask, but that is where we are beginning. And so with that, we are going to take a look at the similarities and the differences between Lent and Ramadan. 9 years ago, when I first came to the Twin Cities, after being away for a while, I decided that I wanted to get to know the Muslim siblings that were living in my state. And so one of the things I did was the summer of 2016 is I decided, when I saw Ramadan coming up, kind of like literally the night before, I decided I was going to use Ramadan as a time to get to know Islam and to get to know my Muslim brothers and sisters that lived in the city with me. And so I decided to observe Ramadan the best that I could. I read up about it, and this is what I learned that we were doing. So Ramadan marks that it's a 30-day celebration, 30-day observance that marks the beginning of the revelation of the Quran to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, by the angel Gabriel. And so for that 30 days, it marks this time of spiritual observance that the whole community does together, which is really, really very, very cool. This is a time, as many people know, in which you fast from food from sun up to sundown, but also you fast from water, and you fast from anything negative like quarreling or fighting or any negative behavior. It's really an opportunity to practice being your absolute best self. And almost every single night, Muslim families will come together and they will break fast at an iftar meal after they have their evening prayer. And then many people will go to mosques, and over the course of the entire month, they will read through the Quran. And so it's not exactly a time where Muslims may get a lot of sleep. They can be up late at night, get up early in the morning before breakfast so that they can do their prayer. And then if they have to work and go to school, it ends up being a lot of energy over the course of that month. But because they do it as a community, families and lots of people coming together every day, there's so much support. And that was something I saw that I really envied and didn't feel like there was anything quite like that in the Christian side of things. Yes, as Christians, we might get together on Sundays. During Lent, we get together on Wednesday nights. At my church, we have a soup supper, and then we have our Ash Wednesday meal. But spiritual practices and other things like that are really up to you to do on your own. They're not mandated. There isn't even one prescribed thing that's necessarily mandated at all, if your church even observes Lent at all. And so I did notice that and sort of found that to be a very beautiful thing, the communal aspect of honoring and celebrating Ramadan together. It's also a time of giving great charity. And so Muslims will save and give a lot of their money over the course of Ramadan, specifically to the poor and the needy. And there's lots of different nonprofits and charities that they advertise and collect money for over the course of that month. Now, honoring and celebrating Ramadan is one of the 5 pillars of Islam. And so it's part of what makes you a Muslim. And because it goes by the lunar calendar, every year Ramadan seems to be on average about 10 days earlier, which is why when I had that summer where I observed Ramadan and went to a lot of iftar meals and met a lot of my Muslim brothers and sisters, that was like right over the summer solstice. It was June and into July. I literally picked in Minnesota the time in which it would be the hardest to fast and trying to do that. And now, as we are in March, and it's pretty much the month of March is what Ramadan is, it's slowly inching in Minnesota towards having less and less sunlight. And so for some, that does make it a little bit easier to observe. Now, the reason why I thought that Ramadan was a lot like Lent is because Lent is also a time in which Christians are called to go on a journey and do some spiritual disciplines, and there can be fasting as well. So the beginning of Lent is actually probably one of the oldest Christian seasons, you might say, the Christian observances in all of Christianity, besides Easter, right? So we have Easter, and it's the 40 days that lead up to Easter. And Easter, unlike Ramadan, which goes about 10 days earlier every year, Easter kind of goes back and forth within about a month. The earliest that you can have Easter is March 22nd, and the latest is about April 25th. And it all has to do with when that first full moon after the spring equinox happens. That next Sunday is Easter. And so you take the 40 days before that, and there you have Ash Wednesday. And so for those 40 days minus the Sundays, because Sundays don't count in Lent, it is an opportunity for Christians, if they want to learn, to grow, and to do some spiritual disciplines. And for some churches, like Lutheran churches, it can be as simple as we meet on Wednesday nights for soup suppers and for special Wednesday night services where we sing very special different music. On Ash Wednesday, which is coming up this very Wednesday, many people will come and get ashes in a sign of the cross on their forehead as a way to begin and mark the season of repentance, of reflection, and of spiritual practices. Now, for some people, they have had negative experiences with Lent. I completely understand that sometimes Lent has been seen as a very dry, a very joyless, and a time that's very filled with shame and guilt. Sort of you're reminded that you're a great sinner and Jesus had to die for you. And a lot of the season is one in which you think, what can you do without? You're thinking about what a sinner you are, and you're giving up stuff, like don't have any joy, don't have da-da-da-da. That is not the way I've ever understood Lent, and I don't think it's actually really helpful. So I'm going to give you a maybe slightly updated version of what Lent can mean. As I said, it's one of the earliest seasons, and in the early church, when people wanted to be a Christian, they would go to a community and they would become a catechumenate, a student. And for the 40 days before Easter, they would go through some intense learning about what it meant to be a Christian, because it wasn't really well known. It was still a new faith and a new religion. And then on Easter Vigil, that person would be welcomed into that special Easter Vigil the night before Easter service, which was the big deal. And they would come before the community and they would be baptized, buck naked, mind you. And then for the first time, they'd be able to go into the inner sanctuary with the community and have communion. And that really meant that they were a part of things. So this was a really special and important journey. And over the years, it has taken on many different traditions, including this idea of repentance. And this comes from the concept that 40 is a significant number in the Bible. 40 generally means a time of growth that's not always everybody's favorite time. So Jesus was in the wilderness for 40 days, confronting sort of the demons within and without to prepare himself for ministry, so he wasn't taking his ego into his ministry with him. 40 is also the amount of years that the Jewish people were wandering in the desert, finding and establishing their relationship with God before they went to the promised land. And so 40 is not exactly a time you would use to describe the best time in the world. It is a time of growth, a time of struggle, and a time of understanding a little bit more about who you are. In my perspective, then Lent is something that is up to each individual to wonder, as you're walking towards Easter, what is going to be good for me in my relationship with God? What's going to help me to love God better, love myself better, and love my neighbor better? Because that's the core and the heart of faith. What's going to help me reflect a little bit more deeply and see the world and myself with more clarity? And all of that can be filled with love and grace. This idea that you have to feel bad about yourself, that you have to beat your chest, that you have to be filled with shame and guilt of what a sinner you are, to me, feels very old. There are times that we might feel bad for ways we've behaved and things we've done as an individual and collectively as a humanity. And there's a time and place for that. But imposing fear, shame, and guilt upon people is something I am not a fan of and not a proponent for. What I usually like to tell people is this is a time for you to think about what is going to help you to deepen your spiritual life. And you can choose. You can choose to add something, or you can choose to subtract something. If you choose to add something, for example, it might be you want to take a nature walk every day, where you just walk quietly in nature and you either pray to God, or you talk to the trees, or you just listen to what comes up in your own soul. You take that time and you reflect. Last year, I did automatic writing for a whole year, the whole season rather, in which I would address an ancestor or a saint or Jesus, and then I would just allow for what came forth to come forth. And that was a beautiful practice of adding something to my life in a way that was meaningful and helped me to grow in my own understanding of myself. But you could also do something more like serving the community. You could read books that help you to understand a certain population that is marginalized. Acts of service or ways to learn and grow in love towards your neighbor is another faithful way that you could observe Lent. But you could also do something that could be healing for you as well. You could think about some of the pains and hurts that you carry within that you feel like now you might be ready to address. And you could take the season of Lent as a time in which you can really work on getting healing with that particular thing. So that would be adding on a spiritual practice of some kind in a way that would be life-giving. But people also give things up. And none of these, I want to clarify from the Christian perspective, from my perspective, none of these are done to impress God. Nothing that we do is gaining points with God. This is literally for our own sake. We are already loved. We are already worthy just as we are because we are children of God. It's we who need to often do the realizations and have the observations and to heal. And so a lot of the work we do as humans is to grow and to heal. So that is for us. So some people give things up, and that could be seen as a kind of fast. People will fast from social media. They'll give that up. And again, it's for their mental health. It's for their opportunity to maybe put their attention on something that is more life-giving. People may fast from foods that aren't good for them or from alcohol. Oftentimes you fast from something that may not be completely good for you. And so you're taking this time in 40 days. It's not that long. You can take the time to put that away. Some people will actually on Wednesdays or Fridays fast from food as well, if that is what they want to do and find spiritual meaning with that. Some people might fast from riding a car. Some people may have a capsule wardrobe in which they make sure that they just have simplicity in what they wear so that they can change the relationship that they have with their clothing. Some people will fast from purchasing anything. So none of these things, as I said, are gaining points with God. All of them, whether you're fasting or adding something to your life, are meant to give you more clarity and focus in your relationship with yourself and with God and your neighbor, so that maybe you have a new insight to bring with you to Easter Sunday, that when we celebrate the resurrection of Jesus, it's this time where you feel new life growing within yourself as well. And so that is really, in my understanding, what Lent is good for. And I see so much similarity with that in Ramadan, that my Muslim brothers and sisters whom I have met over the years really have shown me how beautiful that month can be and how beautiful their faith is. And I just want to share one final story before I go. When I was going to the mosques and going to the iftar meals and getting to know people for the very first time, I was very nervous. I didn't know if I was doing things right or wrong. I didn't even know if they would like the fact that I was trying to observe Ramadan with them. And part of the reason I was doing that is because there was a lot of Islamophobia that was going on in our country, and I wanted to make a stand against that. And I did make friends, and I met some absolutely amazing men and women who were so gracious and so hospitable and so kind to me that it really, really showed me the most beautiful aspects of that faith. So that's just a little bit of a summary that I have for you. And if you have any questions or well-meaning comments, I'd love to hear them. But in the next few weeks, I will actually be going deeper into some of the spiritual practices that anyone can do. But because it is the season of Lent, just things for you to think about and ponder as you go on your own personal spiritual journey. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.